the world and to write songs. That was my gift. And I just always wanted to make it into a business.
Dolly Parton's final days, what really happened before her death at 84 days. That is what makes the ending of Dolly Parton's story so difficult to process. 4 days before she died, Dolly was still talking about tomorrow. Still talking about unfinished work. Still talking about dreams. Still sounding like the woman America had known for nearly 60 years, determined, funny, hopeful, and almost stubbornly unwilling to surrender to whatever life placed in front of her. Then, on August 25th, 2026, the news came. Dolly Parton was dead at 80. The girl from the Smoky Mountains who had somehow become one of the most recognizable women on earth had died peacefully in Nashville, and within hours, millions of people were asking the same question. What happened? Because Dolly's death did not arrive after some long public farewell. There was no retirement tour, no carefully staged goodbye, no final television special where she told America this was the end. In fact, the opposite was true. Only days earlier, she was still speaking about what she hoped to accomplish. Then her representatives revealed the detail that changed how those final months looked. Dolly Parton had died after what they described as a brief battle with cancer. The specific type of cancer was not publicly disclosed. And suddenly, the cancellations, the hospitalization, the health problems, the exhaustion, and even some of Dolly's own final words carried a very different weight. Because while the public knew she had been struggling with her health, almost nobody understood how close the end really was. And perhaps Dolly did not want them to. For decades, she had mastered something few celebrities ever manage. She allowed the world to know Dolly Parton without allowing the world to own every private part of Dolly Parton. The wigs were public, the rhinestones were public, the jokes were public, the songs were public. But the deepest pain, that was different. Dolly had spent a lifetime turning pain into something other people could survive. She rarely asked them to carry hers. And nowhere was that more apparent than during the final chapter of her life. To understand what happened, you have to go back before those last 4 days. Back to March 2025. That was when Dolly lost Carl Dean. Her husband, her partner, the man who had stood quietly beside one of the loudest and most famous careers in entertainment history for almost 6 decades. Carl was never interested in becoming Mr. Dolly Parton. He avoided red carpets, he avoided interviews, he avoided celebrity, and somehow that may have been exactly why their marriage worked. Dolly belonged to millions of people. Carl belonged to Dolly. They met in Nashville in 1964, shortly after the teenage Dolly arrived there, determined to become a star. They married in 1966. And for nearly 60 years, while Dolly traveled, recorded, acted, wrote, performed, and built businesses, Carl remained her private center. Then, he was gone. He died in March 2025 at age 82. And according to Dolly herself, the period of caring for Carl had affected the way she handled her own health. In one of her final interviews, she acknowledged that while looking after him, she had not paid enough attention to herself. It is one of those statements that sounds simple until you know how the story ends. Because after Carl died, Dolly began facing health problems that increasingly forced even her to slow down. She had dealt with kidney issues. Reports described a kidney stone infection. She experienced dizziness and dehydration. And people later reported that Dolly had also been dealing with kidney and autoimmune problems before her final hospitalization. For almost anyone at 80, that would have been enough reason to stop. Dolly did not stop. She adjusted. There is a difference. That difference defined her entire life. When she could not appear somewhere physically, she tried to appear virtually. When health forced plans to change, she changed the plans. When one project slowed, she focused on another. Even after postponing her Las Vegas residency and ultimately canceling it, she continued working on business ventures, philanthropy, and the musical based on her life. Her final public appearance came in June 2026 at the opening of Dolly's Tennessean travel stop in Cornersville, Tennessee. People who saw her there described a woman who still looked happy, engaged, and unmistakably Dolly. 2 months later, she was gone. And that contrast is important. Because Dolly Parton had spent her entire career making difficult things look easy. You saw 6-inch heels. You did not see the aching feet. You saw the smile. You did not necessarily see the grief. You heard the joke. You did not always hear what came before it. That began long before fame. Dolly Rebecca Parton was born January 19, 1946, in rural Tennessee. She was one of 12 children. Money was scarce. Privacy was scarce. Comfort was scarce. But music was everywhere. Church music, mountain music, family music, stories, faith. Her mother could turn ordinary moments into stories. Her father worked relentlessly despite having little formal education. And Dolly absorbed both sides of that upbringing. From her mother came imagination. From her father came work. She would eventually build an empire out of both. But before the empire came a little girl who realized very early that her voice could take her somewhere beyond the mountains. She sang in church. She performed on local radio. She appeared at the Grand Ole Opry while still a teenager. And the day after graduating high school, she left home for Nashville. There was no backup career, no comfortable family fortune waiting if music failed. She went because she believed she belonged there. That kind of confidence can look obvious once somebody becomes famous. It was not obvious then. Nashville was filled with young singers who thought they were special. Most disappeared. Dolly learned something that would separate her from almost all of them. Being able to sing was not enough. She had to write. She had to understand the business. And most importantly, she had to own what she created. Her breakthrough with Porter Wagoner gave Dolly national exposure. For years, millions of Americans saw them together. Porter was established. Dolly was the newcomer. But slowly, the newcomer became impossible to contain. Her songs became bigger. Her identity became clearer. And eventually, she knew she had to leave. Leaving Porter was emotionally complicated. Rather than turn that complicated relationship into bitterness, Dolly did what she always did. She wrote. The song was I Will Always Love You. It was a goodbye. Not an attack, not revenge, a goodbye. And decades later, that song would become part of one of the most important business decisions Dolly ever made. Elvis Presley wanted to record it. For a songwriter from Tennessee, hearing that Elvis wanted your song should have been the easiest yes imaginable. But there was a condition. Elvis Presley's management wanted a substantial share of the publishing rights. Dolly refused. Think about how difficult that decision must have been. This was not Dolly Parton at the end of her career, looking backward with hundreds of millions of dollars behind her. This was a younger artist being offered the validation of Elvis Presley. She could have told herself that half of something enormous was better than all of something uncertain. She did not. She kept the song. Years later, Whitney Houston recorded it for The Bodyguard. Her version became one of the defining recordings of modern popular music, and because Dolly had protected her publishing, she benefited enormously from its success. But the money is only half of the story. The real story is the decision. Dolly understood something before many artists did. Fame can disappear. Applause stops, tours end, beauty changes. But ownership can survive you. That principle helped turn the woman people sometimes dismissed as a glitter-covered country singer into one of entertainment's shrewdest business figures. Her catalog eventually contained thousands of songs. Then came Dollywood. Film roles, television, licensing, books, tourism ventures, products, real estate, and an image so distinctive that a silhouette of enormous blonde hair could practically function as a logo. But here is where Dolly Parton becomes more interesting than simply another rich celebrity. The farther she traveled from poverty, the more obsessed she seemed to become with giving other people opportunities she had never had. Her imagination library began in 1995. The idea was beautifully simple. Children should receive books, not because their parents could afford them, not because they had earned them, not because they lived in wealthy neighborhoods. Because children deserved the chance to read, the inspiration was deeply personal. Dolly's father could not read and write well. She adored him, and helping children develop literacy became one of the missions closest to her heart. Over the decades, the Imagination Library grew from a local program into an international operation, distributing hundreds of millions of books. Dolly became famous for writing songs. But quietly, one of the largest parts of her legacy became helping children learned to read them. Then there was her $1 million contribution to research at Vanderbilt University Medical Center during the COVID-19 pandemic, funding that helped support research connected with the Moderna vaccine. After wildfires devastated areas around her beloved Smoky Mountains in 2016, Dolly created the My People Fund to help families who had lost their homes. That phrase mattered. My people. She never stopped calling them that. She could live anywhere. She could mingle with anyone. Presidents knew her, rock stars knew her, Hollywood knew her, royalty knew her. But somewhere inside Dolly Parton remained the girl looking toward those Tennessee mountains. And that is why her final year feels almost painfully circular. She had spent decades caring for other people. Then she spent an intensely personal period caring for Carl. And somewhere during that process, by her own account, she neglected herself. After Carl died, grief entered a life that Dolly had always insisted on filling with motion. Work had been her answer to pain for decades. Heartbreak became songs. Poverty became stories. Fear became jokes. But at 79, and then 80, the body eventually demanded something even Dolly Parton could not negotiate with. Rest. Her health problems became harder to ignore. Public appearances became fewer. Some plans were postponed, then canceled. On August 14, reports said health issues involving dizziness and dehydration prevented her from attending a Dollywood event. 5 days later, on August 19, Dolly still appeared virtually to accept an Academy of Country Music honor. And then came August 21, 4 days before her death. Dolly spoke publicly about going through difficult health problems. That same day, she was hospitalized. She had already been dealing with kidney and autoimmune issues, according to later reporting. Imagine that timeline. August 19, still participating, still connected to music. August 21, talking about health. Hospitalized August 25. Gone. There was almost no emotional runway for the public. And yet, even during that final period, Dolly was still speaking about the future. People reported that only 4 days before her death, she talked about having many things she still wanted to achieve. That may be one of the saddest details of all, because there is a common image of the final days of a great star. Someone looking backward, reviewing the trophies, replaying old songs, satisfied that everything important has already happened. Dolly was apparently still looking forward. A Broadway musical inspired by her life was moving ahead. Business projects were active. Her philanthropic work continued. There were still songs, still ideas, still plans. And perhaps that is the most accurate ending possible for Dolly Parton. Not sitting still, not declaring herself finished, still imagining another chapter. Then, on August 25, her representatives announced that Dolly had died peacefully in Nashville at age 80. Initial reports did not publicly specify the cause. Later that day, her representatives confirmed that she had died following a brief battle with cancer. They did not reveal the type. And that distinction matters. The kidney problems were real. The dizziness was real. The dehydration was real. The autoimmune issues were reported. But viewers should not turn those conditions into an invented cause of death. The confirmed explanation released by her representatives was a brief battle with cancer. Perhaps that privacy was exactly how Dolly wanted it. She had never believed that fame entitled strangers to every room in her house. Her marriage was proof of that. Carl remained largely private for nearly 60 years, while Dolly became internationally famous. There was something almost rebellious about it. The public could have the songs, it could have the jokes, it could have the enormous hair. But certain things remained theirs. That boundary survived all the way to the end. And then came the tributes. Musicians, actors, fans, people who had grown up with Dolly, people whose parents had grown up with Dolly, children who had received books from her foundation without fully understanding who had sent them, people who knew Jolene, people who knew 9 to 5, people who knew Coat of Many Colors, people who first heard I Will Always Love You through Whitney Houston and discovered only later that a young woman from Tennessee had written it decades earlier. They were mourning different versions of the same person. That may be the clearest measure of Dolly Parton's reach. She had not simply survived changes in American culture. She somehow belonged to all of them. Country music changed. She remained. Pop culture changed. She remained. Fashion changed. Dolly became even more Dolly. New generations arrived expecting the old stars to disappear. Instead, they discovered her. She could sing with legends from her generation and then work with artists young enough to be her grandchildren. She entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame after initially questioning whether she belonged there and then responded in the most Dolly Parton way possible. She made a rock album. At an age when most performers protect their legacy by repeating themselves, Dolly kept adding to hers. Which brings us to the money. Estimates of Dolly Parton's fortune varied widely during her life, largely because valuing her songwriting catalog, business interests, and other assets was complicated. But reducing Dolly's story to a net worth number misses the most interesting part. She knew what being poor felt like. Then she became enormously wealthy without pretending she had never been poor. She did not erase Locust Ridge from the story. She commercialized parts of her image. Certainly, she understood branding better than almost anyone. But she also used that brand to pull attention and money back toward Tennessee. Dollywood created jobs. Tourism expanded. Her literacy programs grew. Families received help after disaster. Children received books. That does not make Dolly perfect. No human legacy is perfect. But it makes the shape of her success unusual. She spent her life transforming things. A childhood coat made from scraps became a classic song. A painful professional goodbye became I Will Always Love You. Being underestimated became part of the joke. Poverty became ambition. Fame became leverage. Money became philanthropy. And grief became work. Until finally, perhaps, there was one thing she could no longer transform. Time. Dolly Parton died at 80. But look closely at the final chapter and something strange becomes clear. She never really behaved as though she were preparing to leave. That is what makes the ending hurt. Carl had died. Her health had worsened. Appearances had been missed. Plans had been altered. She was hospitalized. And still she was talking about what she wanted to do next. Maybe that is why Dolly's death feels less like the conclusion of a carefully finished story and more like somebody suddenly turning off the lights while the music was still playing. There were unfinished projects, unwritten songs, unopened doors, another stage somewhere in her imagination. But maybe a life does not need to be finished to be complete. Dolly Parton had already done what the teenage girl leaving Tennessee could barely have imagined. She became a songwriter whose words traveled farther than she ever could. An entertainer recognized around the world. A businesswoman who refused to surrender ownership of the work she believed in. A philanthropist whose name arrived inside millions of homes on the cover of children's books. A wife who protected one great love from the machinery of celebrity for almost 60 years. And a woman who understood that you could dress yourself in rhinestones without pretending life was always shiny. There is an image people will remember. The enormous blonde hair, the bright clothes, the smile. But perhaps another image deserves to remain beside it. Dolly, very early in the morning, before the makeup, before the lights, before the cameras, sitting quietly with an idea. Writing, because underneath almost everything else, that was the foundation. She was a songwriter. She took feelings people struggled to explain and made them singable. She took ordinary human pain and gave it a melody. And now, the strange thing happens. The woman disappears. But the words do not. Tomorrow, somebody will hear Jolene for the first time. Somebody will play Coat of Many Colors and think about their mother. Somebody will hear 9 to 5 on the way to work. Someone nursing a broken heart will discover I Will Always Love You. Somewhere, a small child will open a book delivered through the imagination library without understanding that the woman responsible for it is no longer here. And in that moment, Dolly Parton continues. Not as a headline, not as a net worth estimate, not as a cause of death rumor, as an effect one human being continues having on another after she is gone. Maybe that is the part of Dolly Parton's story no accountant could ever calculate. You can estimate the houses. You can estimate the businesses. You can value publishing rights. You can count albums, awards, ticket sales, books. You can put a dollar figure beside almost everything Dolly built. But how much is a song worth if someone heard it on the worst day of their life and decided to keep going? How much is a free book worth if it becomes the first book a child ever loves? How much is hope worth? Dolly spent 80 years answering those questions without ever needing to say the answer. On August 25, 2026, Dolly Parton's life ended. Her representatives say she died after a brief battle with cancer. The exact type remains private. But 4 days earlier, she was still looking forward, still imagining, still believing there was more to accomplish. And perhaps that should be the final image. Not Dolly Parton dying, Dolly Parton planning. Because from the mountains of Tennessee to Nashville, Hollywood, Dollywood, and stages around the world, she spent her entire life believing there was always something beyond the hill she had not reached yet. And she kept climbing toward it. Until she couldn't. If Dolly Parton's music was ever part of your life, leave the name of the song you will always remember her by in the comments. Not because a legend needs another number, but because somewhere inside those thousands of comments will be the real measurement of Dolly Parton's life. One song, one memory, one person at a time.